More than best friends. Prologue. Sia had loved Vihan for as long as she could remember. From the days of scraped knees and shared candy, to late-night phone calls where he spoke of his dreams, he had always been her world. But she was just his best friend. So when their families arranged their marriage, Sia thought maybe, just maybe, this was fate's way of giving her a second chance. A chance for him to finally see her. But as she stood in her bridal dress, staring at her reflection, she realized one cruel truth. Marriage doesn't create love where there is none. And as she walked toward Vihan, waiting for their vows, she wondered. Would she spend her entire life loving him alone? Chapter 1. The wedding that didn't feel like one. The wedding was everything Sia's mother had dreamed of, grand, extravagant, and full of laughter. Guests danced, petals showered over them, and their families beamed with joy. But Sia felt nothing. Her hands trembled in Vihan's as they sat side by side in the mandap. She glanced at him, searching his face for something, anything, that would tell her this moment meant something to him too. Vihan was smiling, relaxed, like this was just another day. Her heart sank. Didn't he feel even a little nervous? Didn't he realize this was their forever? As the priest instructed him to apply sindoor in her parting, his fingers brushed her forehead. For a moment, her heart stuttered, was this the moment things changed? But then, as he tied the Mongol Sutra around her neck, he smirked and whispered, "Looks like you're stuck with me now, huh?" Sia's throat tightened. This was a joke to him. She forced a laugh, hiding the lump forming in her throat. It had always been like this. Vihan never took things too seriously, especially not her. The crowd erupted in cheers, and just like that, she was Mrs. Sia Vihan Malhotra, a wife to a man who didn't love her. Chapter 2. The first night of a lifelong distance. Their wedding suite was decorated with rose petals and scented candles, the dim lighting setting a romantic atmosphere. But romance was the last thing in the air. Sia sat on the edge of the bed, her fingers clenched around the heavy fabric of her lehenga. Vihan, on the other hand, was busy unbuttoning his sherwani, completely at ease. He sighed dramatically. That was exhausting. She forced a small smile. Yeah. Vihan turned to look at her, and for a moment, her breath hitched. Maybe he would say something meaningful. Maybe he would acknowledge that this wasn't just any night. But instead, he grinned. Let's be real, you must be just as relieved as I am that we don't have to do the awkward newlywed thing. Shah blinked. What? He flopped onto the couch, stretching. You know, pretending to be some lovey-dovey couple. We're best friends first, right? No need for all that. A sharp pain shot through her chest. Best friends. Again. She stared at him, her heart begging her to say something, to demand more from him. But what was the point? He had no idea how much those words hurt her. So instead, she swallowed her pain and forced a nod. Right. And that night, she lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, while Vihan slept soundly on the couch, completely unaware of the storm inside her. Chapter 3. Cracks in the perfect facade. The first few weeks of their marriage were strange. Vihan still treated her exactly the same. He stole bites from her plate, teased her about her terrible handwriting, and dragged her along to meet his friends. But there was no change. No shift. No moment where he suddenly saw her differently. It was as if their wedding had been a minor inconvenience, a legal formality rather than a life-altering event. Sia tried to act normal, but the weight in her chest grew heavier each day. Anika, her best friend, was the first to notice. They sat at a cafe, sipping coffee, when Anika leaned in and said, "Okay, spill. You look miserable." Sia's grip tightened on her mug. "I'm fine." Anika scoffed. "Sia, don't lie to me." Her throat burned. She hesitated, then whispered, "Vihan doesn't see me, Ani. Not the way I see him." Anika's eyes softened. "Sia, he still thinks we're just friends," Sia continued, voice cracking. "He doesn't even try to be my husband. And I don't know how long I can pretend that's enough." Anika exhaled sharply. "That idiot. How can he be so blind?" Shah laughed bitterly. "Because I never told him. And now, I don't think it matters anymore." But she was wrong. Because the moment Nisha entered their lives, everything changed. Chapter 4. The Other Woman. The first time Sia saw Vihan with Nisha, she felt like the ground had been ripped out from beneath her. It was at a family party. Sia had been chatting with relatives when she heard a familiar laugh, his laugh. She turned, and there he was. Standing close to her. Nisha was beautiful, confident, the kind of woman who turned heads effortlessly. And Vihan, he was looking at her in a way he had never looked at Sia. Something inside Sia snapped. Later that night, as they returned home, she couldn't hold it in any longer. "You like her," she blurted out. Vihan frowned, confused. "Who?" Sia's hands clenched into fists. "Nisha. You like her, don't you?" Vihan's silence lasted a second too long. Sia let out a shaky breath. "Would you have married me if our parents hadn't arranged it?" He froze. "Sia, I need to know, Vihan." His throat bobbed. And then, finally, he looked away. No, the word was a death sentence. Sia felt something inside her shatter. And for the first time since their wedding, she realized, she couldn't do this anymore. Chapter 5. The Breaking Point. Days passed. Sia stopped trying. She stopped waiting for him to love her. Stopped hoping for a change that would never come. Then, one night, she spoke the words that had been suffocating her. "I want a separation." Vihan's fork clattered onto his plate. "What? I can't do this anymore," she said quietly. "I love you, and I'm done pretending that friendship is enough." His face drained of color. "Sia, you don't mean that." She laughed bitterly. "Don't I?" He stood, panic flashing in his eyes. "Sia, wait. No." She lifted her chin. "You wouldn't have chosen me, Vihan. And I can't live knowing that I was never enough." Then she walked away. And for the first time in his life, Vihan felt what it was like to lose her. Chapter 6. The Loneliness of Losing Her. Sia left. And Vihan didn't stop her. Not because he didn't want to, but because he didn't know how. For days, he told himself she would come back. That she was just upset. That this was a phase. But as time passed, the house felt unbearably empty without her. The silence pressed against his chest. The food tasted bland. The jokes weren't funny anymore. For the first time, he noticed things he had never paid attention to before. How Sia always left his coffee exactly how he liked it. 2 sugars, no milk. How she always made sure the AC was set to his preferred temperature at night, even though she hated the cold. How her laughter had always filled the gaps in his life that he had never realized were gaps. And now, she was gone. Chapter 7. The Confrontation That Broke Him. "You're an idiot." Vihan blinked up at Anika, who had barged into his office unannounced. "Excuse me," he muttered, rubbing his temples. "You let her leave," Anika snapped, slamming her hands on his desk. "And now you're sitting here, moping. Instead of fighting for her." Vihan exhaled sharply. "I don't know if she'll take me back." Anika scoffed. "And that's an excuse. Shah spent years loving you, and you never saw it. You don't get to give up now." He flinched. "Ani." "No," she cut him off. "You listen to me. You never deserved her, Vihan. But she still gave you everything. And now you're scared." She was scared every damn day of your marriage, wondering if you'd ever love her back. But she still stayed. Vihan felt like the air had been punched out of his lungs. "She wanted you to fight for her," Anika continued, voice softer now. "And you just let her go." Vihan stared at the table, guilt suffocating him. Because Anika was right. Shah had always been there. Always waiting. Always hoping. And he had taken her for granted. But not anymore. Vihan stood abruptly, grabbing his keys. Anika smirked. "That's more like it." Chapter 8. A Confession That Came Too Late. Shah was at her parents' house when Vihan arrived. Her mother greeted him warmly, but there was hesitation in her smile. "She's in the garden," she said. Vihan walked outside, heart pounding. Sia stood by the swing, lost in thought, her fingers trailing over the wooden frame. She looked different, not broken, not weak, stronger, and that terrified him. "Sia," She turned, and for the first time, there was no expectation in her eyes. No waiting, just quiet exhaustion. What are you doing here, Vihan? She asked, voice steady. His throat tightened. I needed to see you. She sighed. Vihan, I love you. The words tumbled out before he could stop them. Sia froze. He stepped closer. I love you, Sia. And I know I should have realized it earlier, but... She cut him off, her expression unreadable. Do you love me, Vihan? Or do you just miss me? The question hit him like a slap. Sia held up a hand. Do you love me because you're afraid of being alone? Or because you finally see me? Vihan's heart pounded. Sia, She shook her head, stepping back. You don't get to come here and say these things just because you're scared of losing me. I deserved this confession months ago. Years ago, not when I finally decided to stop waiting for it. Pain crashed through him. But I do see you now, he whispered. Sia's lips parted, her eyes searching his. And for the first time, she saw hesitation in him. Fear, doubt, and that was when she knew. He wasn't ready, not yet. Tears burned her eyes, but she blinked them back. Then prove it, Vihan. His breath hitched. How? She swallowed hard. By learning how to love me the way I deserve. She walked past him, back into the house, leaving him standing there. And for the first time, Vihan realized, if he wanted Sia back, he had to earn her. Chapter 9. The Long Road to Redemption. Vihan didn't give up. He didn't bombard Sia with messages. Didn't show up with grand gestures. Instead, he did something he had never done before. He learned to love her in the small ways. He sent her morning texts, not because he had to, but because he wanted to. He asked about her day, listened, and remembered the details. He showed up at events that mattered to her, stood in the background, and let her see that he was there. And slowly, Sia noticed. Chapter 10. The Final Test. Months later, on a rainy evening, Sia found herself standing in front of Vihan's apartment door. She knocked. He opened it, eyes widening in surprise. Sia. She stepped inside, heart racing. I need to ask you something. Vihan nodded slowly. Okay. She took a deep breath. If our families hadn't arranged this marriage, would you have chosen me? Vihan's jaw tightened, but this time, he didn't hesitate. Yes, he said. 1,000 times, yes. Sia's breath hitched. Why? He stepped closer, reaching out but stopping just short of touching her. Because I love you. Because you make life worth it. Because you were never just my best friend, you were my everything. And I was too blind to see it. Tears welled in Sia's eyes. And this time, when Vihan reached for her, she didn't pull away. She melted into him, gripping his shirt as he buried his face in her hair, breathing her in like she was the air he needed to survive. And in that moment, Sia knew. This time, he meant it. Epilogue. A love that was always there. Months later, as Sia tried on a dress for a party, she turned to Vihan. How do I look? He walked up to her, fingers brushing hers. Like the girl I've loved my whole life. Shah smiled through her tears. Took you long enough. Vihan chuckled, pressing a kiss to her forehead. But I finally got there, didn't I? And this time, when they walked hand in hand, there were no doubts, no regrets, just love. The end.